The Canadian government was providing COVID support to the disabled in Wuhan, China, while Canadians with disabilities were left waiting and waiting and waiting. Sheila Gunn Reid for Rebel News, and I've got the shocking story of how the Trudeau Liberals, with your tax dollars, were helping the infirm and vulnerable in the country responsible for the coronavirus, but, also the world's second largest economy, while Canadians with disabilities received no emergency funding for at least a time. We've got the order paper documents to show you to prove it all. Now let's go back, though, to the very beginning of the pandemic. This here in CTV News, disabled Canadians feel excluded from COVID-19 messaging. The article goes on to detail how disabled Canadians, like the legally blind, were having problems even accessing information about the pandemic early on, when fears of the pandemic were at their most heightened and available information was, at its lowest. But there's more. There's always more. Here's the headline from the CBC from April of 2020. Nadine Law, co-founder of the group Access to All, says people with disabilities have largely been forgotten in conversations around the effects of the virus, particularly in emergency government funding. So, 2 months later, the federal government proposed a one-time payment of up to $600 for Canadians living with disabilities to help lessen the financial strain tied to the coronavirus pandemic. Now, that bill didn't initially get support of the Conservatives because advocates said that it in fact missed a lot of people that should have been included. Now, here's a story from the Canadian press from June 2020. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Conservative leader Andrew Scheer angrily traded accusations Thursday over who is to blame for blocking emergency benefit to help Canadians with disabilities weather the COVID-19 pandemic. So while disabled Canadians were looking for information, but shut out of the ability to get information and apply for programs because the federal government's complete failure to make even applying for these programs accessible to people with disabilities, even after the funding was finally in place, the Canadian government was busy helping the vulnerable and disabled in Wuhan, China, of all places. It's right here in this order paper question posed to the government by Conservative MP from Alberta, Earl Dreeshen. Now, it was previously revealed that the federal government had provided financial aid to China to the tune of nearly $1 million for the Local Initiatives project. So Dreeshen wanted an itemized breakdown of how that Canadian tax money was spent on the ground in China. Yeah, me too, it's called accountability. Well, because Dreeshen asked for it in the form of an order paper question, the government was legally obligated to answer, and here's what I can show you. Let's skip ahead a little bit through the preamble. The government was redacting the project description and redacting the recipient of the Canadian tax dollars in China to prevent us from knowing where our money went and what it was spent on. Let's just stop right here. Canadian tax dollars are flowing to aid initiatives in communist China, and we don't get to know who the recipient was or what the project was in many of these instances. Why? Is this like the foreign aid that we give to Hamas-linked organizations? The majority of things left unredacted are Canadian tax dollars for environmental initiatives in China, the world's largest consumer of coal, if you care about that sort of thing, and of course, gender-based initiatives because naturally. Anyway, nearly $28,000 flowed to a Wuhan nonprofit institution to protect persons with disabilities during COVID-19 in Wuhan, Hubei, through rights protection and health education. Canadians with disabilities had to fight for funding and then fight to improve access to those programs at the very same time. But should we be surprised? This is exactly the deference Justin Trudeau has shown to China through his entire time as Canadian Prime Minister. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. June 1st, YouTube changed their terms of service. What that means for us? Well, it means we're living on borrowed time. When they do kick us off the platform, we want to be able to tell you where we've gone. Go to rebelnews.com. When you get there, there's a little pop-up. It's going to ask you for your email address or your phone number. Drop it in there so that we can stay in touch with you, and we promise we'll never sell your information. That's rebelnews.com.